for the generous introduction. Welcome all panelists and good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all audience on this last session. Title Net Zero. It makes headlines when you talk about environment today, and within that, governments, states, companies, and bodies are looking forward to making their contribution to environmental benefication, climate change, impact abatement, and variety of agenda that we are facing today because of environmental challenges by resorting to net zero. Many in the industry are quite familiar with this terminology, but I thought I'll also put a perspective to net zero as I am seeing it from my consulting work. Companies are using net zero commitment as one of the self-decided targets to actually commit to environment. Most of the commitments made today are voluntary. They're all originating out of the self-commitment of each of these companies to the environment, to the government commitments, and more importantly, to the industry that they belong to. On this topic, we'll hear a lot of experts today. The organizers have done a handsome job of first and foremost getting some very experienced professionals today on the call. But I would say that the heterogeneity of all of these speakers today on the panel not only stands out by their experiences and their expertise, but also by the type of companies. So we have companies who produce, we have companies who advise, we have companies who provide technologies to help companies decarbonize, and there are companies who provide services in making that happen. So it's an amazing combination of all of that. And within that, another very important factor is there are people from research and development, there are people from strategy, business development, and more importantly, operations who have to actually bell the cat in the end. So welcome again to panelists, and thank you for joining this evening. We have a very simple and a straightforward agenda today to help audience understand variety of things with respect to net zero. We have all heard about net zero, but there are many who in the industry are unclear as to what do we mean? Why net zero? Why not zero? When we do net zero, who is going to tell me am I net zero or not? When we do this, what do I do exactly? Who's going to bear the cost of all this? Am I supposed to be looking out for technologies, or is the government going to help us in making that happen? When we take these commitments, is that going to bring any benefits to me when I make this commitment apart from just showcasing my brand which is committed to net zero? Variety of questions of a very basic nature get cropped up. We will discuss about all of those, but also importantly, what are the technologies which are going to help our chemical industry in reaching net zero targets in time or before? It's eminent. I think most of the studies that have analyzed commitments made by companies, governments have said one very strong thing, and that is you accumulate all the net zero commitments made by governments, states, companies, and bodies. It is going to be grossly inadequate to meet the sub 1.5 degrees centigrade temperature rise target. It's not going to be adequate. So there is more required. And therefore, from the benefit of the world and humankind, it's essential that while others think, while more measures are taken, at least the companies and governments who have committed to net zero do it absolutely impeccably. Any resources, any technology that is available in the world should actually get available to them. But more importantly, such sessions bring more awareness, networking amongst people, and exposure and experiences to technology and activities undertaken within the organizations. So from that context, I would request all our panelists today to bring their best experience in the time constraints that we have. We have about an hour and 15 minutes. If there are any questions that get pinged to me on my chat, I will definitely raise to the panelists. But in the meanwhile, we'll go around on the panel, ask some very important questions with respect to net zero, and try and ensure that some of the questions that were cropped up during the discussions for setting up this particular panel are answered. I'll take the privilege of going to Shivang first, if you don't mind. Shivang is on top of my screen, and a company that everyone is looking up to. Shivang compliments Tata Chemicals.
I'm a bit intimidated.
No, it's perfectly all right. So, how about bringing to reality and life what we are reading in public domain about Tata Chemicals? What are you planning to do? How does your commitment jive with the government's commitment on net zero use of renewable energy by 2030, 2070, and all of those targets? And more importantly, how are you planning to achieve it? Is it in phases? Is it in one go? You chosen technologies, etc. We'll be very happy. I'll be coming back to you with another specific question later on, but Shivang, happy to hear you on chemicals.
Thanks. First of all, thanks a lot for having me here on the call with the eminent panelists. Happy to be sharing our perspective and views. So thanks a lot, Deepak. And what you have essentially done in one question, you asked many questions. So let me try to address one by one. I'll start off with our commitment because that's a starting point for us as Tata Chemicals. So, as you have seen in the disclosures and the public domain that we have gone into committing ourselves the path to net neutrality with the milestone of complying and reducing our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions in line with an SBTi norms. And that's something which you can define it as a phased manner. So that's the first milestone that we are targeting. Leading to that is going to be our plan or to net neutrality. So by 2030, we have committed ourselves that we will reduce our absolute emission of scope 1 and scope 2 by at least 30%. So we are targeting more, but at least we are gunning for 30% reduction, and we have started taking initial steps in the same direction. So that's what our commitment is, and it is applicable across our manufacturing facilities and the footprints. Coming to our approach to how we are envisaging this journey per se, is largely divided into what we call as 4 areas of abatement cum sequestrations approach. Starting with itself, looking into the energy optimizations and efficiency management. And that's something which is very critical to us, something which is within us and we are able to impact immediately to an extent. And that's very, very critical for us as a starting point. So that's typically one bucket in terms of the energy efficiency. The second bucket for us is looking at an alternative fuel switch is something what we are looking at, and we've already started making some progress on that front, which gives us a kind of a stopgap solutions to an extent, while it may not be leading us to the end objective for us, but they are something which we call as intermediate milestones for us to achieve. So that's something which is the second bucket that we define. The third bucket, and you may have seen in public domain, is how we utilize carbon for a better value in form of a carbon capture and utilization. And there is more to come in it, but that's something which we have initiated our process starting with UK, and we are going to implement into the other geographies as well. And fourth one is focusing on the renewables and carbon neutral fuel, which will help us transit eventually to very close to the net neutrality. As part of the sequestration is concerned, and I'm referring to the natural sequestration, while artificial one, we already have some solutions around it to create value out of it. But natural sequestration is something which will be a last mile connectivity for us to lead to the net neutrality. I hope I have covered your questions. If I'm something which is unanswered, I would request you to repeat your question, please, Deepak.
Oh, absolutely. You covered on what Tata Chemical wants to do and what kind of approach you're taking. Can I ask a naive question? Did you have the government's targets, the country's targets, when we started deciding within Tata Chemicals as to what is my target, how much am I going to reduce, which year?
Yes, Deepak, see, what we wanted as, the ecosystem which is helping us set the target for ourselves, in absence of any any benchmarks and reference, it's very difficult for a company to travel that journey on its own. And to that extent, CDP, SBTI is something which has helped us get that the milestones which we can constructively work on. In addition, what is happening is the ecosystem is also falling in the similar space. We are of the firm belief, Deepak, that this is not an individual company's initiative. This has to be implemented across the value chain. Tata Chemical on its own, if you were to go and say that, okay, we'll become a net neutral, I think so. We are not being realistic to an extent until and I ensure that the whole value chain is falling in the same direction. Then only these solutions can be implemented and objectives can be achieved. So that's what the kind of internal discussions keep happening within the team, and we proactively engage our supply chain partners across in terms of creating that the cohesive point of view in terms of traveling the same journey. So that's how we have set ourselves objectives and targets.
Amazing. And you mentioned about sequestration, carbon capture. We have on our panel today from Elliott Group, Klaus Brunn, who's a research and direct development professional. Klaus, when it comes to sequestration, is it possible that we achieve net zero energy economy without carbon capture?
No, that is more or less impossible. I mean, if you look at the world energy consumption right now, and if you look at your stationary energy sources, I mean, we can't do much here, at least within this discussion about transportation. But if you look at the stationary energy supply sources, that is worldwide still somewhere well above 80% on the fossil fuel side, right? So you can make a nice impact with alternative energy sources, with nuclear, but fundamentally you're going to have to do something about your fossil fuel. And so there's several technologies available. There's obviously pre-combustion, post-combustion, and flue gas cleanup for carbon sequestration. But one or all of these technologies need to be utilized to take that carbon from your fossil fuel sources, because you can't just cut the world of 85% of the energy that it's receiving right now. So the ultimate goal must be to decarbonize these fossil fuel power plants. That can be done with, as I mentioned, those three technologies. But then you have to deal with the carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide needs to be then sequestered. There's plenty of geological formations available around the world. I'm very familiar with them in North America, less familiar with them in India, but I'm sure they exist. I'm sure there is saline salt geological formations available. But you need to then take that CO2, put it in the ground, and sequester it there. And that is a technology that exists. That technology works. And there's plenty of storage locations, sequestering locations throughout the world for that CO2. But there are some technology challenges, and I can get deeper into.
For a medium-sized chemical company, what all infrastructure will be needed? We needed a layman view. What does one company need to get geared up?
I mean, first of all, you need to separate the CO2, and that obviously depends on your process and your process output. So, there's amine, there's membrane separation, there's various processes to take CO2 out of a gas. And if you're looking at let's say engines or gas turbines or whatever, and you're looking at flue gas, and there are separation processes, but then you have to obviously compress that CO2, put it in a pipeline, transport it to where you could stick it in the ground, and put it in the ground. So there's really three compression processes required. You have to have a compressor to take it to typically about 2100 psi, whatever that is in bar. I'm thinking American terms, I'm sorry. You have to transport it in that state that's a supercritical state over a certain distance, maybe 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers, and then you have to put it in the ground. And you're typically looking at about 1500 psi of injection pressure per kilometer that you have to inject it. So you're looking at a couple thousand psi. So we're talking about compression of CO2 and transportation. So you need a new pipeline infrastructure and you need a new compression infrastructure. But it is not, from a technology perspective, that challenging, and it's actually cost-wise not that expensive. If you're looking at either transporting hydrogen as an alternative and then using that hydrogen somewhere else, that's a lot more expensive. So most of the world right now is kind of thinking along the lines of, if we are going to use, let's say, natural gas, if we continue to use natural gas, then that natural gas will be continued to be transported using the existing infrastructure that exists from pipelines for natural gas to wherever you wanted to use it. You then convert it to hydrogen at that place, and then you transport the CO2 that you get out of that natural gas back to where you sequester it. Or you are continuing to utilize natural gas as you had before, and then you take your CO2 out of the flue gas from your process and transport the CO2 then back to wherever you sequester it. So it's primarily, when we're talking about a decarbonized energy economy, and inside of that we continue to use fossil fuels, the primary challenge is not hydrogen transportation or hydrogen whatever, it's actually carbon dioxide transportation, carbon dioxide injection.
So nice of you. Thank you so much. I'll come back to you once more, Klaus. But Raju, you've been providing technology from FMC to so many chemical plants. How is your formulation for them going to change? What are you doing for your technology buyers to get rid of this problem, as Klaus was saying, pre-commissioning, post-commissioning, or even without carbon being brought in to provide energy or any other research processes? What all changes are happening in your world? What are you offering to the industry?
Was that to me, Deepak?
Yes.
Okay. No, so I think we don't provide technology. So I think there's some confusion there. Let me just clarify. We're essentially one of the leading crop protection companies globally. We're clearly we are looking to address in two parts. One is the part which is internal to us, and the second is which is external to us. External to us is very critical in the sense that agriculture is one of the major culprits, right, when it comes to emissions, and nearly a quarter of emissions come out of agriculture. Of this, almost 45% of the methane, again, of the global emissions, again, comes out of agriculture. Of course, 80% of that comprises of livestock and rice and possibly some more stuff. But then there is a nitrous oxide also. 80% of it comes out of that. So that essentially comes out of fertilizer. So our role in this whole game, so what we have done for ourselves is basically we have taken a two-tier step. One, for the internal one, we have taken up a program which is called Greater Than Green. So in the Greater Than Green, what we have done is, the larger FMC global sustainability pillars, we have set up three major buckets for ourselves: protection, innovation, and engagement, through which we would address all this stuff. And in the protection stage, one of it importantly is we have decided to move beyond a reduction of our own carbon, our own footprint, to drive meaningful improvements, both in emissions, energy, water, as well as waste, aligned to your UN Sustainability Goals 13 and 15. So what we have decided is, one of it that we have decided is that we'll achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. Possibly this, I haven't heard many companies looking at this, so we've gone very aggressive in setting up targets for ourselves, very aggressive. What we are looking at is that almost 42% of the absolute reduction for scope 1 and 2 emissions. That's what one is our target. Second is 25% absolute reduction for scope 3 emissions. And then in our own approach, we have taken a scientific approach. We're setting up science-based targets in line with the SBTi net zero standards. So by doing this, we've actually we're accountable for which progresses which are clearly aligned for the sub 1.5 degree C Paris Agreement that we talked about. What we also are looking at is also use of renewables across all FMC locations globally. We operate in more than 50 countries. So, for example, in India, we already have moved in that location in that direction significantly. Similarly, absolute reduction in terms of tons in water use and waste generation. Earlier we were targeting to go by intensity, water use intensity. Now we have gone on absolute numbers. So we are looking to attack that piece and go aggressive and address this whole piece separately. On the other hand side, towards the farmer, I think what we have done is we are now developing a roadmap to achieve. Of course, these are early days for us, so to achieve the emissions reduction target. Then what we are actually looking to do with this is that we want to partner out, because when we are analyzing this whole thing, what we see is that, like most of the companies, majority of our emissions, almost 94%, are scope 3. Now, so to drive sustainable progress, I think we must focus on reducing scope 3 emissions. So what we have done is we have now engaged all our key suppliers. Of course, many of them have their own climate goals, but we're looking forward to partnering with them, partnering with our employees, contractors, customers all across the globe, and trying to bring this whole thing down. On the other hand side, what we are also doing is we are looking to develop technologies, which is, for example, one of them clearly is, what we call as the precision agriculture, wherein we have built up significantly our own portfolio, which is now driving the need to be very precision oriented in terms of delivery of solutions, rather than going blanket and leaving our footprints everywhere, wanting to be very pointed. And in this process, I think we are tying up with multiple collaborations we're doing. The other ones, again, on the technology space, what we are doing is 100% of our R&D dollars are now committed to sustainability enhanced products. So anywhere where there is a challenge, we're just cutting that out completely, even if it is worth a diamond. So similarly, now we're reaching out to the farmers. A lot of work is being done by us on promoting good agricultural practices among farmers. Of course, amongst our channel partners also, but amongst farmers also, whether it be related to water usage, whether it's related to safe and judicious use of inputs. So we're just trying to teach them how to have a better input use efficiency, so that your input incorporation into the system is reduced, or at least the efficiency thereof is increased. So let me stop here. I think it's been rather detailed. So Deepak, over to you.
No, that's a good one. I'll come back to you because we have a question on what implementations will happen. But I could relate to only other industry called fossil fuel industry, which has more than 90% of scope 3 emission.
Yeah.
And kudos to you for having taken up the scope 3 emissions commitments also. I don't know if regulations drive or not. We'll come into the next round of questions in that. But Mrityunjay, your UPL is a model company in India. Sustainable, long-lasting energy efficiency programs are not new to you. How are you contributing to net zero? Are you committing? Are you using some different technologies, and you have your pathways towards achieving that ready?
Yes, so UPL is fifth largest agrochemical company in the world, and our operation is in 130 plus country. So we have committed publicly that we will achieve net zero by 2040. So that is our long-term commitment. But our commitment and our approach toward carbon emission reduction, we have a 3 program. One is a short-term target we have set, then near-term target, which is science-based target, and the third is the long-term carbon neutrality. So let me talk first short-term target. Our short-term target is to reduce 25% carbon emission by 2025 from 2020 baseline. So this we have set short-term target, and a near-term target is science-based target. And that we have committed that by 2035, we will reduce 62% our carbon emission. And long term is the carbon neutrality by 2040. And if you see our past track, then long back in 2016, we came out with a short target that by 2020, we will reduce 30% our carbon emission. But that commitment was not only for carbon emission, entire environment footprint of UPL. So we talk about the 30% reduction of carbon, 30% reduction of water consumption, 30% reduction of waste. And last 5-year track record, if you see, then we achieved in carbon, we have achieved 27% reduction. And in water and waste, we have achieved more than 30% our target. So like that, this is about our target and program. So a part of internal program, we are also focusing externally. And since we are working with farmers and all our product portfolio is to help farmer to feed the world sustainably. So there we came out with certain program, and one our ambitious program, which is getting implemented by Nurture.farm, is a crop residue management to avoid the stubble burning. And today you may have seen several news that when the farmers burns the residue, then a lot of emissions happen and hue cry happen. So we have brought one innovative product, and when farmers sprayed that, so they can avoid the stubble burning. And today, last season, we have covered nearly 420,000 acres where we have used our product. And if you see, it is equivalent to avoiding carbon emission 1 million ton CO2. So 1 million CO2 get avoided by last season in 420,000 acres where we have implemented this project. And this is equivalent to a scope 1 and a scope 2 emissions of UPL globally. So in that term last year, if you see, whatever our emission, a scope 1 and a scope 2 from our operation was globally, that we have offsetted with just a single program. And like this, 3-4 programs our Nurture.farm is managing, and they are working with farmers. So that's about this program. Now coming to our operation, in operation, we are first focusing on operational excellence, and through operation excellence and innovative technology, we have brought down our emission. As I have told you, last 5 years, we have brought down 27% carbon emission, and again focusing next 5 years, further 25% carbon emission reduction. And the second initiative we are taking on renewable sources. So we have green power purchase agreement and 67 megawatt green power purchase agreement we have right now, and we are using that green power inside our operation. Also, we are using biomass, and wherever coal get used, we have made it mandatory that we will use 20% biomass in coal. So we will avoid 20% fossil fuels by using the biomass along with that. So I think this biomass and the green power purchase agreement, that has helped us a lot. And presently we are working on certain innovative project on carbon capture, also on hydrogen energy. So this is at the stage of innovation and development. So I cannot share much more, but we are working in that direction, and we are very sure that by 2035, we will achieve 62% reduction, and by 2040, we will achieve carbon neutrality inside the UPL organization.
Very, very interesting. Thank you so much. You are on one side trying to reduce carbon emissions, you are trying to offset them, and also helping emissions not coming from industry, but from agricultural to be abated. Very well done. I'm tempted to straight away go to Ankur then. Ankur, TCM Sriram is into so much of industrial activity. Also, not too far, very, very well connected to the agricultural industry. How are you planning to do this in your strategy to achieving net zero? How are the financing plans? Are there any major roadblocks to such kind of net zero plans that you are facing? Over to you.
Great. Thanks, Deepak. I think our approach in DCM is relatively more realistic. The nature is that we are into very diverse set of businesses in the conglomerate.
Yeah.
At a group level, we are relatively cushioned. For example, we have a very high energy intensive caustic soda business, and then we have a sugar business where there is a green power coming from cogen operations. So to some extent, there is some cushion there. But we are proactively looking at our scope 1, scope 2 emissions. We are continuing to expanding our sugar footprint so that greening at a group level continues. But coming back to the larger question, which is the chemicals business, which is almost more than 60% of group's bottom line. We jokingly call ourselves the utility company, not the chemical company, because at our two sites, we operate close to 500 megawatt of combined power from fossil fuel. Now we are into caustic soda, again energy intensive, then we are into carbide-based PVC. Until now, the only one, but after yesterday's news, we may have competition. But the larger picture is that when we are looking at these elements of carbon neutrality and net zero, we are coming from a very inward towards outward approach. What is first in our hand to do that? And the first stage, what we are looking at, the input cost. We don't control, we have seen the government plan, but we want to look at what is my internal target. So my first and foremost target is to look at is the fossil fuel reduction. We are currently in the process of executing 3,000 CR worth of CapEx at our Gujarat site. But during this process, we took a bold call of going 30 megawatt of renewable while we are commissioning a 120 megawatt of fossil fuel power. So that is something which is a very bold call which we have taken in the process. Secondly, we are looking at mixing the fuel mix. So we are now targeting close to 40% of the biomass going in our utilities, and with new generation power plant, which we have put up, has a more capacity to take input feed. The third element which we are looking at is right now capturing the flue gases coming out of our process, both at our Gujarat site and Rajasthan site. So these are the broad element which we think is right now in our hand to go immediately. Now, some of the incremental position which we can take, one is the CO2. Now we also have a distillery operation at our sugar units. Right now we are, and it's a pure CO2 which is coming out of the process. We are selling it to the bottling companies. Can we look at CO2 plus hydrogen as a combination to go to 2G ethanol, which is, depending upon the prices, these are too early to speculate, but that is another window which is open. The third element which we are looking, Deepak, that now Gujarat as an ecosystem is also very resource scarcity is something which is cropping up. Not just so energy is something we all talk about when we look at a carbon balance, but the water, the effluent, something which is grossly ignored. Anyone who's taking my effluent is actually burning and adding to the carbon emission, to be fair. And some of them are third-party incinerators. And there is no incentive. So what we are also doing the proactively in our CapEx is we are trying to build the in-house incineration for most of the waste rather than sending it out. Now, nobody's paying for me, to be fair. And the incentive is the other element which I want to talk about. It increased my CapExes, but at least as an ethical citizen of the corporate industry for 130 years, this is something what we think as a group, bare minimum we can do to start with. Now, at a stage 2, we will work with our customer on their footprint. For example, caustic soda goes into textile, into soap and detergent. We have customers like Unilever and P&G. We want to sit across with them and their target and understand their overall target, and how as a vendor or as a supplier we can contribute. And therefore that is going to be our place too. We still feel that at least market side perception yet to mature. So there is a lot of work need to be done on input cost side, but that is something what we are looking. Again, the very realistic approach, we still believe that there would be a lot of cloud around the neutrality versus zero and so on and so forth. But we are not waiting for it. We are moving ahead with our target as we go.
Amazing. Amazing. And I quite liked you very quickly narrating even the challenges that are confronted to your things. And in a very similar manner, the Indorama Ventures representative Samir is here. Let's hear from him also as to what his company is committed to. They have a very cost typical business, if I may say, as compared to very other speakers that we have had today. So Samir, it'll be interesting to hear as to how are you going to deal with all of this, and do you also foresee any commitments to scope 3? Because there are no consumptions, it's all non-combustible product that you give. But over to you from a technology value chain perspective and your commitments.
Sure. So first of all, sincere thanks to organizers for inviting us to represent in this forum. I'm glad to be part of this forum and this esteemed panelist. Indorama is a global petrochemical company based out of Thailand, and we operate 136 manufacturing sites across the world. We have 26,000 employees, and we are about $15 billion in revenue. So you can imagine the sheer size, and implementing those measures across this size is really a daunting task. We have 3 divisions. Our largest division is PET. So we are world's #1 PET manufacturer. And what we say is every 1 out of 5 bottles in the world are made of our PET. Our second division is fibers, where we make nylon, polyester, etc. And third division is integrated oxide, which makes surfactant, right, backward integrated up to ethylene. So these are 3 different divisions. For us, the sustainability journey started right from 2010, so it's not new to us. We have been doing initiatives which are following the sustainability steps right from 2010. And no doubt we are committed to net zero, but we believe in taking defined measures or steps which will define our journey towards net zero. So we have a clear defined targets 2025 and 2030, reducing our carbon footprint. In terms of investment, we are really pleased to say we have committed $2 billion by 2025 and $7 billion by 2030 for improving our sustainability as well as reducing our carbon footprint. In terms of approach, what we do is there are 3 things we look at. Of course, it's the entire value chain. So on the internal side, we look at reducing our energy intensity, reducing our greenhouse gases, and everything has a clear targets defined. So for example, we are going to reduce our energy intensity by 5% 2025, 15% by 2030. We'll reduce our GHG 10% by 25 and 30% by 2030. We are going for renewable electricity, again 10% by 25 and 25% by 2030. We are going to reduce our water intensity. And most important, we are also looking at bio-based feedstock. We are looking at a significant portion coming from bio-based feedstock. So this is on the internal side. Also, being such a big manufacturer of PET, which goes into plastic bottles, of course. So we have a huge plan. We are looking at recycling 50 billion bottles by 2025 and 100 billion bottles by 2030. Plus, we have a target of recycling education to our customers or consumers, and we aim to educate 10 million customers by 2030. On the external side, of course, we are working with suppliers for bio-based raw materials, etc. And on the customer side, we have some reputed FMCG companies, also agrochemical companies who are our client. And we are looking at solutions through innovation, which helps them to reduce plastic usage, to reduce raw materials which are not environment friendly. And we are also looking at projects which will capture the CO2 and convert them into a useful finished product. So there is an overall approach on all fronts to reduce our carbon footprint and move towards direction of neutrality. I hope I have answered your questions.
It was perfect. Thank you. Very quick and
Thank
a
you.
perfect overview on how your products are also getting managed and what ambition you have in that.
Thank you.
Purposefully, I have kept NTPC as one who will give an overarching answer because NTPC is a behemoth. NTPC has a very large carbon footprint, and consciously the public company is aware of all of this. Rahul, whom I work very closely with otherwise also. Let's have from Rahul the specific hydrogen related aspects that NTPC is helping itself and using as one of the pathways to achieving net zero for themselves. Rahul?
Thank you, sir, for the question, and I thank the organizers for inviting me for this event and being with this good set of panelists and being the August company and listening to very good ideas. NTPC, as you know, was called NTPC, a thermal power corporation now, but we have diversified into green hydrogen and renewables in a big way. We have created wholly owned subsidiaries that are focusing primarily on renewables and green hydrogen. So now NTPC sees this transition and focuses in 4 priority areas. One is the diversification of the mix. So we were primarily coal. Now we want to be putting up similar capacity which we have built in the last 40 years. So we are now 70 gigawatt in total, and now we want to build up to 60 gigawatt by 2032. So equal capacity addition of renewables in just 10 years, what was done in the past 4 decades. Then we want to bring more efficiency into our system. We have phased out to the projects that were less efficient, so that efficiency gains are actually reflected, and we reduce the carbon footprint of our average carbon footprint per kilowatt hour of power generated. And then the other pillar of our decarbonization is the carbon capture. We are doing a very innovative pilot project where we are capturing carbon using the methylamine technology from one of the power plant stacks, and then generating green hydrogen using a 5 megawatt of electrolyzer, and then synthesizing green methanol, and then using it as a replacement to our fuel oil. And in addition to all this technical things, we are also doing afforestation in a big way. We have planted around 37 million trees overall. And if something on net zero is to be told, we have just picked up a target of 2070. But saying that doesn't mean that NTPC is not aggressive. We'll be gradually increasing our energy mix and then decarbonizing it. Now, to the question that was asked on green hydrogen, NTPC, I would say, is the pioneer in green hydrogen, and we have taken several initiatives and pilot projects just because we want to get a foothold in this area, and we want to scale it up to the levels people have not seen or cannot anticipate. We are doing pilots in green hydrogen mobility to start with at Leh and Delhi. And then we are also blending green hydrogen in the PNG network at one of our townships, so that this gas sector is decarbonized in a big way. And in the future, these are all futuristic. And then we are doing a microgrid based application at one of our locations where we'll be generating hydrogen from the floating solar and then storing it during the daytime, generation of storage during the daytime, and then using it throughout the night using a fuel cell. So repowering hydrogen that was already generated through a fuel cell. So these applications have the potential to decarbonize this hard to abate areas of like a DG based off grid areas where there's only one solution, that is generators. And these are few of the initiatives, and then we are also doing planning a pilot on green ammonia. So this is one part. These are the pilots. Whereas we also tying up with technology providers so that we can go big for the commercial projects and also be a good exporter of green hydrogen and green ammonia in future. So these are few of our hydrogen initiatives, sir. And other than this, I already elucidated about green hydrogen, green renewable energy ambitions. we have around 2 gigawatt already commissioned, whereas 14 gigawatt of renewable energy is in pipeline, and we are 8% carbon free. 8% of our capacity is green energy. That's all from our side. If any specific questions.
Thank you so much, Rahul.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll come back to you, Klaus. In most of these companies' plans, we heard about sequestration being one of the mainstays. Power plant stacks versus chemical process plants, carbon emission stacks. Is there a difference from a carbon capture perspective? Is the technology any complicated or less complicated? How do you differentiate? What's your pecking order of recommendation in industries which should, from a cost implication perspective, going for carbon capture straight away, whereas few others would need more complications? Over to you. Thanks.
The largest chunk of and the lowest hanging fruit would be just power generation, right? Because it's not that you cannot sequester carbon from other processes, but then you really have to look at one-offs and two-offs, right? Whereas if you look at power plants, generally speaking, power plants all over the world look the same, right? You have a pulverized coal power plant, you have a natural gas combined cycle power plant, and so they all look the same. And so the technology development and the implementation for those kind of plants do not drastically change between the plants. So you can, for example, implement a carbon capture sequestration scheme on a Siemens power plant in Europe, and you can use the same technology for a General Electric power plant in North America or wherever in the world. So the easiest and the lowest hanging fruit would really be just power plant sequestration. There is a huge amount of debate in the industry on what's the best way of going about it. Some people are saying you should make hydrogen and put that hydrogen in there instead of natural gas. Others are saying you run the plant with natural gas and then you take your CO2 out at the back end. The numbers I have seen are currently advantageous actually to take the CO2 out of the back end, so out of the flue gas. That is a mature technology that exists, that has been demonstrated. But I'm honestly going to say there's a huge amount of debate in the industry about it, so you can go either way. From a compression perspective, and remember, we're a manufacturer of turbo machinery, we make very large compressors, etc. From that perspective, it is actually easier to look at pre-combustion, so making hydrogen, running the gas turbine with hydrogen, because then you get your carbon dioxide at a higher pressure, and the higher the pressure it is, the easier it is to get it to the pressure that you want to go to. So from a compression perspective, we prefer pre-combustion separation to carbon dioxide, but that's, you know, that may not be the answer that plays out. One way or the other, that's your low-hanging fruits. You really want to go with power plants first. That doesn't mean that there aren't other areas like cement plants. They're very big producers of CO2. I'm sure there is many sources of carbon dioxide in the chemical industry, petrochemical industry, refineries, etc. So all these should be addressed eventually, but it's really the power industry you want to focus on right now.
Amazing. Thank you. Very, very clear. Shivang, I have a question, very simple though.
Sure.
There are chemical companies on the panel and in the audience today. Those companies who are committing to net zero have a lot of cost to commit to itself. There aren't regulations pushing you to do so, either partially or fully, whether by a deadline or not. And it's an open market, so you're competing with companies who are committing to decarbonization and some others who may defer or may not as of now. How are you doing all this? Are regulations important? Are there any obligations? Are there any slapped carbon emission regulations that you want to see? How is it all going to shape? Because the market is same, companies have differentiated approaches.
Yes, perfect, Deepak. So a short answer is a big enabler is a regulation. What we have seen Europe traveling a path is essentially the regulation driving the economics around that, which brings everybody on the same level playing field. So carrot and stick story in the Europe is working, and that's how people are transitioning. We understand for the economy like India who are emerging, India is going to remain on a growth trajectory, and to that extent, the primary energy source is going to be extremely high. May not be the feasible path that regulation may be driving those mandates. And to that extent, the path to net neutrality in certain geographies is something which is a difficult task. And this is one of the areas which we are looking at in terms of transitioning gradually towards the net neutrality. Having said that, there are certain areas which we have identified which could be of a value, and we have already started looking at some of them. One of the areas is how you can create a better value out of the process itself. And the classical example is what we have done in United Kingdom, where we have repurposed our manufacturing process of manufacturing sodium bicarbonate with the carbon capture, which gives us purity and the grade, which is directly pharmaceutical grade. No subsequent process required. It's a pharma grade bicarb that you can produce. Conventionally, the bicarb plants are linked to the soda ash plant and produce the industrial grade bicarb, and then they are converted into the pharmaceutical grades. We have eliminated a process in itself by capturing carbon and feeding in the very high purity carbon in itself, so that we are able to eliminate some of the cost centers there and try to provide a better value to the customers. So that's something which is one key area where we look through the process innovation in itself in order to provide some of the solutions. The second one is how I can transit to a cheaper energy source as against the energy source which is polluting and more expensive. Typical in the chemical plant, there are two forms of energy that we use. One is in electricity and second is in steam. Now, we have cost optimum solutions when we talk about the electricity. However, steam is the most efficient heat transfer medium that today the chemical plants use. The approach when we look into the energy transition is how I can transfer my energy source from steam to electricity. Essentially, it gives me a much shorter path and a cheaper path to access the same amount of energy and try to achieve my target. So those are some of the areas that we are optimizing and looking at, while maintaining our commercial viability and implementing some of the solutions. Having said that, we believe it is imperative that at some point in time, regulation must come in order to provide a level playing field for all the players, to move as a whole value chain and not really looking at an element of the value chain going to that area. The third area, Deepak, is extremely important today, and as a companies we must focus in is today we are not giving options to the consumers and customers. I give a small analogy. Today you go to a supermarket and you have an option of taking an organic produced food, even at a high premium price. We all do that, even if in a small segments, but that option is available to customers. The question is, does customer today have an option of buying a carbon neutral detergent, even it as a premium? Because it is not only the regulatory push or the market forces that needs to drive. When we look to the systemic approach to sustainability, it is individual, organizations, and community has to move in the same tandem. And we believe as a companies, we have an onus of offering that solution to the customers in order to travel that path. So these are some of the high level view we carry, and we firmly believe in some of these ideas that which will help us travel this part despite having these challenges of the difficult cost and the non-regulation regime. Thanks,
Amazing.
Deepak.
Thank you so much. Product differentiation is a must. It's something which you can do in house, and if you are a good company, you will do. Thank you so much, Shivang. This was very enlightening for audience. Mrityunjay, Ankur, Samir, I have one combined question. Are you looking up to the carbon markets to mature, to give you dividends for a good job that you're doing so that you are able to manage costs? The way Shivang said that regulations could control, your costs are going to be committed for all your programs. So carbon markets, how are you looking forward to, Mrityunjay?
So I think the carbon market, if you see, then credit, offset, these all talks going on. And I think if that comes in and get implemented, then we will be benefited, because several projects we are undertaking, as I have given you example of avoiding a stubble burning. So it will be helpful. But what our experience at UPL is, that the path of carbon neutrality is enabler for smarter innovation and profitable growth. And we have found that when we set sustainability target in 2016, and when we focus on reduction of carbon emission, reduction of water, reduction of waste, then today, if you see that nearly 30% carbon footprint and the water and the waste we have reduced, it's translating nearly 45 million US dollars saving for the energy, water, waste bills. So actually it's enable profitable growth. Also, it's brings several innovation inside our organization. We have green sale, we have energy sale, we have Max Pro, we have Max Pro Plus Plus, 4 innovative organization within the UPL, and they get opportunity to work on the several projects. And actually, it's proven to our operation that all the technology which we bring, the innovative idea which we used to bring for carbon neutrality, it's actually saving the cost. So it is enabler for the cost saving and also smarter innovations. So at UPL, we feel like this carbon neutrality and the environment footprint reduction program.
Very, very fresh perspective. Thank you so much, Mrityunjay. Samir?
So I guess as a profit-making enterprise, obviously each company will look at the benefits, the credits, carbon credit, etc. But the primary drive right from our promoters to senior leadership is to create a sustainable world. We want to make a sustainable world and we are responsible to this society. So that's how we are driving the things. And of course, when you define the projects, etc., you will look at the benefits of carbon credits, etc. But our primary drive remains committed to the society.
Wow. Very enlightening. Thank you, Samir. Ankur?
Well, we shouldn't wait for the carbon market, because it is irony that at a speed where the world agreed on a carbon neutrality, they didn't even talk about the carbon market at the same speed. This market yet to reach to a very streamlining position where everyone is talking the same, at least a pricing mechanism and monetization all three. I agree with Samir that it is going to be driven by sustainability. For example, I am in a large scale continuous process chemical operation depending on fossil fuel. Forget about everything, it's a business need. Sustainability is a business. So one is the cost angle, the second is the environment and ecosystem. And of course, third is that the time has come where we work with our customer to make the product available on the shelf.
Did I lose him? Looks like. Okay. All right, we'll wait for Ankur to come back. In the meanwhile, Raju, you mentioned 25% contribution to emissions. Is it a different market than industry to bring this sensitivity of emissions and its reductions, or is it equal to industry?
You know, I'd say agriculture is, much of it is coming out of livestock. So you know, actually it offers great opportunity of innovation right now. If you can have, and the methane that they generate, the animals, and unfortunately what's happening is there's more and more population wanting to have meat. So there's a significant amount of animal meat consumption going up, ramping up significantly, and countries like China and US and others, forget about them. And even country like India, I was looking at the numbers, except for the northwestern part, most of the country, almost 93% population is meat eating population. So this is one piece where I think there's a serious need for innovation to neutralize the methane which is coming out of here, or maybe, if possible, suitably utilize it. people are working on it, but I don't know where is it going. On the other hand side, I think there are identified culprits like rice, the transplanted rice. So there's a lot of discussion that is taking place because every time we export a kg of rice, we are actually exporting almost about 5,000 liters of water out of the country. Now, so the thought clearly is, can we grow rice with less water? So there are a lot of work that we are doing around it. See, what happens is if you grow rice with low water, what we call as direct seeded rice concept, it leads to a serious issue of weeds infesting the crop so much that the main crop is not able to grow. So can we have technologies that give rice crop weed control coverage for so long that it does not need a standing water, which is continuously emitting large amount of methane and other effluent. So then the other area which clearly, as I see it, is input use efficiency, like I said, and the formulations thereof. For example, urea. If you look at only urea, and then the use efficiency of urea is sitting at something like 27 to 30% today, which means what? 70% of it is either going down or going up. Both places it is kind of creating the havoc. But then we need to use, so what we are looking at is applying biotechnology and see whether we can address this aspect. We also are looking at working with various startups where we are looking at the soil itself and looking at what can you do at the existing level of soil that kind of reduces the activity of harmful bioorganisms there and increases the activity of, accelerates the activity of the useful bacteria there. If you could do that, you would actually be ending up, having a way better use efficiency of the fertilizers that are being put in. So yeah, of course, I mean, there are a large number of options available, technologies people are working on, and I think they will be a must as you grow. Because I mean, even for bulky fertilizers like urea, the logistics itself leaves so much of footprint behind that it is an issue. So we have, of course, we've had IFCO introducing nano urea, where they say, okay, a bottle will take care of your whole acre, where you used to use something like 3 bags, like 150 kgs of urea. So yeah, I mean, all of us are working in that direction. So I would say nanotechnology, biotechnology, essentially, and interface with agronomy and chemistry is one frontier area where all of us are working to see how do we address this challenge. So that's what it is right now.
Terrific. What you're bringing forward itself answers a question saying handling climate and environment is not going to be easy as such. And there's all the effort that's being put in by companies like you. Terrific. Yeah. I'm very impressed and a very, very educating interaction by you. Thank you so much. Rahul, last question. How is government helping all of us? Because the proceedings that we have had on this panel until now has been self-initiated. Samir said very stellar sentence and that we are conscious about the environment and so on and so forth. Shivang said, we will differentiate in products, let the customers recognize my differentiation in product and we'll recover money, don't worry. I didn't hear any one of us saying, I need help from the government. I did hear about the regulations to bring people in part. You work with a state-owned company, and in fact, there is so much of interaction that you want to do with the government. Can you bring to light some real good things that the government is doing, notwithstanding what private sector is doing, to ensure that the mammoth targets that we have in front of us will be handled? Rahul?
I mean, I would say the government is doing a lot. I mean, if you see the kind of RE targets that the government has got, to some it might just appear to be a number. But if you see the kind of target that around 500 gigawatt of RE capacity is required by 2030, So that says a lot about what its direction is going to be. And if you see the green hydrogen, the government is, as per the draft, it is actually targeting 1,20,000 megawatt capacity of electrolyzers. That would require around 200 gigawatt of renewable power by 2030 alone. And if you see the kind of mandates that government has brought in their draft is around 50% by 2030 for all the complex fertilizers as well as the petroleum refining and 100% of green hydrogen usage by 2035. So these are some good numbers to start with, and the kind of the bidding mechanism or the kind of I mean the trajectory that the government is thinking and the encouragement for in the form of PLIs for electrolyzers and PLIs for solar modules, batteries, and all that government has brought in. One would say, I mean, given the fact that COVID had taken all the clout from all these good initiatives, but these are some very good initiatives towards decarbonization. And if you ask me about the carbon markets, yes, the carbon markets are a place where government needs to look upon. It's not matured, probably that has to be done on a voluntary basis. But if you say bringing renewable into the grid and then targeting 50% energy in energy terms of greening the grid is a very good target by the government. But let's see, I mean, whether these targets realize, and both industry and government have to work together for this.
Just one element, Deepak, sorry, if I may. No, one element I want to bring about here is because purely coming from an agri-food company. So, see, we need to address the eating behavior of the population. Essentially, if you look at it, about a third of the food globally is wasted on the plate, and roughly about another 30% is wasted in the field through the pests. So, if you address these two, I think the footprint of agriculture would go down significantly, and the footprint of food itself will also go down significantly. So, and of course, if you can get people to be more herbivorous than carnivorous, that also brings down your footprint significantly. So I just thought some trivia, because as it is, the NDCs are only covering 38% of the ag emissions as per Paris Agreement. So you still have a lot left on the ground.
The interesting point, I can make an analogous point if you want to on the energy side, right? You're saying a third of the food is wasted and another third is wasted in the field. On the energy side, most power plants in the world and most industrial operations operate somewhere in the 30% efficiency range, right? Which means that 70% of the energy is wasted. Your typical car engine runs at 30% efficiency. Okay, I mean, this technology is complicated, but there are power plants available that run at 50, 60%. So a huge amount of energy in the world is also just wasted. And if you could do something about that by making your infrastructure and your power plants more energy efficient, you could easily reduce CO2 footprint in the world by hundreds of millions of tons of CO2.
Deepak ji, you are on mute.
I was
I
on
handled
mute.
No. Klaus, you're very much heard. So I was on mute. So that's a perfect interjection. I think the wastages in industry and in customer habits or citizens' habits are a must to even deal with this decarbonization. And Klaus, especially you struck another chord in me because for my bread and butter, I do digitalization in energy companies, chemical companies, to bring in energy management and improving efficiencies to reduce carbon emissions. So it's so important that in today's call, we did not speak about digitalization, but the digital pathways to decarbonization are equally strong. And what you mentioned is with a given asset, it's already saddled. We are given an asset. How do I get its efficiency up? Digitalization works wonderfully. Thank you so very much. So we dealt with 3 problems today. One is how industry or chemical industry is dealing with net zero. Raju made a very nice interjection saying citizens have a contribution, and Rahul mentioned that there is a strong support from the government. So I feel together we will make it. We'll continue our march towards netting it out and we'll succeed. On that note, thank you so very much for an amazing panel. I learned so much from all of you. Back to organizers. Have a good day.